Hi, welcome back to another episode of Nobody's Doing It Right, the podcast for those who are uncertain. My name is Kat, I'm your host, and today's episode is about distinguishing the difference between intention and expectation and why you should attach to your intention, but not to expectations, because that causes a lot of unnecessary suffering. So let's get into it. I talk about this a lot, right? I talk about how expectations are not something that you should be thinking about or focusing on. And I'm not the first and only person to talk about this, of course. I think it is a common understanding to a certain extent, or at least something that's commonly discussed. But I think a lot of the misunderstanding or misconception of this is that, why wouldn't you attach to an expectation, right? You do things, anything you do in life, you do for an expectation, right? But I would disagree with that argument. I see that argument a lot in my comments, right? Because I say how if you act out of an expectation towards something, like you expect something, it can sometimes make you act inauthentically. Because if you are trying to attain something, some sort of end goal in mind, and you see it a certain way and you want it exactly the way you see it, you might do things that are not aligned with you and your true path just to get to that specific end goal, to that specific expectation. And when you maybe don't meet that expectation, because that's not how life works necessarily all the time, you feel really awful and you suffer and you struggle and you try to force it to happen and it never happens. So you feel very unfulfilled and unsatisfied. So I get a lot of comments about this topic saying that, but why would you do anything if you don't have an expectation to it? Everything we do has an expectation. And I would argue that it's not that you have an expectation. I think you're confusing expectation with intention, because the things we do have an intention, right? Something as simple as eating. The intention behind eating food is that it's going to curb your hunger. It's going to satisfy your hunger. It's going to provide you health and nutrients and wellness and whatever. But you cannot always expect that. Now, of course, there are some things in life you can expect because it's happened over and over again. Sure. Right. When you eat some food, then you eat it and you feel full and great. But sometimes that doesn't happen. Right? So when we attach too heavily to an expectation, even with things that we've seen repeated over and over again, the one time that they don't happen the way we expect them to happen, it can be very jarring, right? And I just use food as a very simple example. Because let's say in this scenario, you have a favorite food and every time you eat it, you feel so good after. It's delicious, it's satisfying, it's fulfilling, like all the things, right? And you go and you sit down and eat it with the expectation that it's going to be fulfilling. You expect it to be fulfilling and delicious and whatever. And you sit down and for some reason you get food poisoning from it, right? Because sometimes that happens. The expectation was that it wasn't going to happen, but it did. Now, if you think about it more from the place of intention, you intended to experience the good stuff you experience with the food you like to eat. But when something goes awry, because that is part of life, you aren't so devastated because you were expecting it to be so amazing all the time, because your intention was what you were focusing on. And the days that the food is delicious, it meets your intention. Great. But life takes turns sometimes, and we can't always force the expectation to work or be so devastated when the expectation that we've been holding on to so desperately in our minds isn't fulfilled. So again, food is just a simple example, but there are so many other ways to look at this, right? Intention and expectation are two different things, and I think it's important that we recognize the difference so that we can feel okay. This can apply to relationships as well, right? You start dating somebody, you go into it, they seem really cool in the beginning, you really like them, they're attractive, they're all these things, and you obviously start thinking about the potential of where this can go because you would like a relationship, right? Now, if you focus too heavily on expecting it to work out exactly the way you're envisioning it, whatever fantasy image you have in your mind, and of course, there's nothing wrong with fantasizing and daydreaming, but if we hold on too tightly to that fantasy and expect it to happen the way we're fantasizing it to happen, when or if it doesn't happen, that's very devastating, right? It creates this cognitive dissonance because we were so heavily attached to the expectation. Now, if you go into the relationship with intention, which I think is what we should be going into relationships with all the time, the intention of, I'm looking for a relationship and I like this person so far, so I'm intending it to happen with this person. I'm going to keep seeing them, I'm going to keep dating them. I'm intending the outcome to happen with this person, but I'm not expecting it because I don't know them yet. And you're going to always keep learning about people and things, any circumstance. But the intention is what you're holding on to. I intend it to happen. And if it doesn't, that's okay, because I just want to stick to my intention. And if this person is not aligning with my intention after a couple of dates, after a few months, it's not as devastating because the intention is what you're trying to follow. So if it's not with them, it's going to be with somebody else rather than the expectation, which is wholeheartedly with them, right? So if they're not fulfilling the expectation of it was supposed to work out with them, I expected it to work out with them and it's not because they're just not aligned with a deeper intention, right? They're not somebody who can give you a relationship. They're not in the place to have a relationship. They're not a good partner, whatever. Now you're struggling with the cognitive dissonance of, but I envisioned them to be this person. I expected them to be this person. But because they're showing you more and more of who they are, which is a normal process to dating, it's confusing you because you've attached too much to the expectation. And furthermore, when we attach too much to the expectation of things, we will maybe go out of our way to force it to happen, right? So if this person, we're expecting that this is the one, right? We're expecting this is the person that it's going to work out with. Despite maybe not knowing them fully yet, still needing time to flesh them out as a person, whatever, we're expecting it to happen with them. So when they start showing us maybe characteristics that are not aligned with who we want to be in a partnership with, right? What's actually aligned with us and, our morals and our values and whatever. If we are attaching so heavily to that expectation, we might start acting in ways that are not aligned with our morals and values either to make it work with them. So now you're creating this dynamic of inauthenticity because of the expectation that you've attached to, rather than the intention. Because the intention is closely tied to your morals and values, of course, right? That is a deeper internal goal that you set, right? An intention, without the attachment to an expectation that might not look at all like what this intention is guiding you to at the end of the day, right? Because you can intend to have a relationship and you might expect it to look one way, but when you actually remove expectations and allow things to flow and follow where that intention takes you, it might take you to something or someone that looks completely different than what you expected initially, right? But if you are so stuck on the expectation, you might start acting in ways that are inauthentic, pushing you out of your alignment to make it work. And it just doesn't work because it's not meant to work in that way because you're not aligned and it's not aligned with your intention. So now you've completely distorted your own authenticity to make something work because of the expectation of it, not the intention of it. And I think that is very important to keep in mind because even I forget sometimes. Even I get lost in expectation versus intention. And I have to reel myself back and remind myself like, oh, wait a minute, you're attaching too much to an expectation, not an intention. And another example can be, with work, right? You are intending to create a type of career for yourself, right? You cannot also then expect it to look a specific way because the intention of, I want a career where I get to work remotely, I get to do the kind of work that feels good for me, that allows me to feel fulfilled in maybe my creative endeavors, might not look like what you expect it to look like because your expectations might sometimes be tied to what you've been taught growing up or what you've seen around you. But what you've seen around you is not necessarily everything that's possible or everything that exists. So if you attach too much to expectation, you can also limit yourself a lot and not be able to see the bigger picture and see what actually is possible for you, right? So if you're intending a remote job that allows you to work on your own pacing and do creative work or fulfilling work or whatever, but you also want it to look a specific way that you've seen people in your life do it as when you were a child or growing up, now when you see an opportunity that is more aligned with the intention but not the expectation because it looks different, you're missing out on it because you're not aligning with it because you're not following the intention. You're following the expectation, and the expectation is smaller and doesn't actually guide you to what you would actually be fulfilling for you, right? The intention part of it. So I think it's really important to keep in mind, ask yourself, anytime you're trying to make a decision or anytime things aren't flowing or you're in any sort of like crossroads about things, ask yourself, is this intention? Am I attaching to my intention right now and aligning with my intention, or am I attaching to my expectation, what I thought I wanted or what I thought it should look like or what I've been told it should look like? Get yourself back in that headspace to check in with yourself, basically. That's what it is. You have to check in with yourself. And it's not easy, of course. It's a practice, right? But you want to make sure that you're checking in all the time so that you don't lose sight of it and you don't lose track of yourself. And you have to then do a really intense course correction afterwards because you've gone too far down the expectation road rather than the intention road. And intention is so much deeper than expectation, and it can look like so many different things. And it's so expansive when you focus on intention because anything can be possible if the intention is aligned with it, right? And of course, intention still leads you to your morals and values. It's not supposed to lead you to something that's not at all aligned with you, right? Intention is more grounding and it's more rooted deeply in who you are and who you want to be. Whereas expectation might be rooted in somebody else's idea of who you should be or what you think you should be, right? So focus on intention, attach to intention, and intention is not going to lead you astray. And expectation could potentially make you act inauthentically, which will then completely make you not be who you want to be or who you want to align with long term. So I hope this was helpful. I hope it was informative. If you want to work one-to-one with me to talk about these things in more detail, of course, I'm not a therapist. I'm just very passionate about these things. You can book a one-to-one call with me. You can also subscribe to my Substack where I write about these topics. And you can follow me on my social medias. All the links will be in the show notes below. And I'll be back again soon with another episode.